Now that we talked about absolute value having two possible solutions, let's solve absolute value equations. Step 1. Use inverse operations to isolate the absolute value sign. So basically your goal is to get the absolute value signs by themselves. Here's the important part. Check to make sure that the absolute value, once it's isolated, does not equal a negative number. Remember, absolute value can never be negative. It always comes out to be positive. Therefore, you wouldn't go further if you saw that the absolute value did equal a negative. If it's positive, continue. Step 2, rewrite the new equation as opposite results without the absolute value signs. And finally, step 3, solve the equations. You can always check your answers by substituting back into the original equation. Let's see what this looks like. Number 1, 4 times the absolute value of x plus 2 equals 24. Step 1 says to get the absolute value by itself. So right now the absolute value is being multiplied by 4. Let's divide on 4 by both sides so we can get the absolute value by itself. Now that I've done that, I get the absolute value of x plus 2 equals 6. So I'm ready to begin. I need to make sure that the absolute value equals a positive number. Absolute value of x plus 2 equals 6. Yes, I can go on because it equals positive 6. Now you write this as two solutions. X plus 2 equals 6 and x plus 2 equals negative 6. Now you start to solve, subtract 2 on both sides, and you find that x equals 4 and x equals negative 8. Number 2. The absolute value of x minus 3 equals 4. We need to get the absolute value by itself, so let's add 3 to both sides. So now I get the absolute value of x equals 7. Since the absolute value equals a positive number, I can now break this up into two separate equations again in step 2. X equals 7 and x equals negative 7. Luckily, there's nothing to solve here, so my solutions are just 7 and negative 7. Try to substitute it back in. The absolute value of 7 is 7 minus 3 equals 4. The absolute value of negative 7 is also 7 minus 3 equals 4. Another one. X minus 2 equals 5. We're lucky here because the absolute values are already isolated, so we don't have to do anything here. Since it equals positive 5, we can set this up as two separate equations. X minus 2 equals 5 and x minus 2 equals negative 5. Let's solve by adding 2 to both sides. You get x equals 7 and x equals negative 3. If you substitute back in, 7 minus 2 is 5 and the absolute value of 5 equals 5. Negative 3 minus 2 is negative 5, but the absolute value of negative 5 is 5, which equals 5. So we're good. Let's try this one. Absolute value of 2x minus 7 minus 5 equals 4. Well, I need to get the absolute value by itself, so let's add 5 to both sides. You get the absolute value of 2x minus 7 equals positive 9. Again, because we get that positive 9, we're ready to go to step 2. Let's break this up into two separate equations. 2x minus 7 equals 9, and 2x minus 7 equals negative 9. Let's add 7 to both sides and then divide by 2. 9 plus 7 equals 16 divided by 2 equals 8, and negative 9 plus 7 equals negative 2 divided by 2 equals negative 1. Now let's look at something a little different. The absolute value of 7x minus 4 equals negative 3. The absolute value is already isolated, but how can the absolute value equal a negative number? Whatever comes out of absolute value is always positive. So you cannot go further. There is no solution to this problem because nothing would ever get the absolute value and equal negative 3. Let's look at number 2 though, something a little different. It says -3 times the absolute value of 7x minus 4 equals -3. Well, I didn't isolate the absolute value yet. That's my first step. Let's divide by -3 on both sides. Now I get absolute value of 7x minus 4 equals positive 1, because -3 divided by -3 is positive 1. Now I would go further, since it equals a positive on the other side. So be careful. Just because right now it looks like it equals -3, until you don't isolate the absolute value, you cannot make any decisions. That's why that's step 1, to get the absolute value by itself. Now you'd set this into two equations, 7x minus 4 equals 1, and 7x minus 4 equals -1. And you can continue to solve. Let's do a self-assessment now to see what you've learned. Number 1, the absolute value of x minus 13 equals 24. Pause the video here. You should have noticed that step 1 is already done for you, where the absolute value is by itself. So now you can add 13 to both sides. And when you do that, you have x minus 13 equals 24 and x minus 13 equals -24. When you add 13 to both sides, you get 37 and -11. Number 2, 3 times the absolute value of x plus 5 equals 8. Pause the video here. This is kind of like a two-step equation. You should have first subtracted 5 on both sides, giving you 3 times the absolute value of x equals 3. Now, divide by 3 on all sides to get the absolute value by itself. Well, 3 divided by 3 is 1, so you get the absolute value of x equals 1. Still a positive number, move on. X equals 1 and -1, since there was nothing to really solve there. Number 3, the absolute value of 2v plus 6 equals 18. Subtract 6 on both sides. Pause the video here. You get the absolute value of 2v equals 12. Since it was positive, you broke this up into two different solutions. 2v equals 12 and 2v equals -12, leaving you with solutions 6 and -6. And finally, number 4. 2 times the absolute value of x minus 5 equals -8. Pause the video here. You should have divided by 2 on both sides first, leaving you with the absolute value of x minus 5 equals -4. You should have noticed that since the right side of the equation equals a negative number, -4, this is not possible. So you should have said no solution. Nice job. You may now begin the partner check worksheet.